The motion light above the back door came on at 2:17 in the morning. When I checked the camera, the yard was empty. My name is Cal. I'm a Finnish carpenter. I work residential jobs in the hill towns of western North Carolina, and last November I was staying alone in a rental house outside Morganton while my wife, Dana, was visiting her sister in Ohio. 3 nights by myself. I'd done it plenty of times. We'd been renting that house for 7 months. I knew its sounds: the furnace tick, the wind coming through the gap above the laundry room window, the creak of the second porch step when a raccoon crossed it at night. I knew the sounds. That's what made it so hard to dismiss. The first 2 nights were fine. Come home from the job site, eat, watch something, bed by 10. Normal. The third night, a Tuesday, I was up later than usual, lost track of time watching something on my phone. It was past midnight when I finally turned the bedroom light off. I was almost asleep when the back motion light triggered. I keep a Nest camera on the back door and one above the garage. I grabbed my phone and opened the app. The yard was gray and flat in night vision. Nothing moved. The rear fence line was clear. The gate was closed. After 2 minutes, the light clicked off. I told myself it was the wind catching the tarp I had over my table saw on the back porch. It had happened before. I put the phone down. Then it triggered again at 2:44. Same thing, empty yard, gate closed. I watched the feed for 4 minutes, nothing. I set the phone on the nightstand and lay there. The furnace ticked. Outside, the wind moved through the oaks along the fence, and the bare branches made that soft clatter they make in November when the leaves are gone. It was one of the first hard, cold nights of the season, maybe 34 degrees. I remember that because I'd scraped frost off my old Tacoma that morning. The cold had come in under the back door as a thin draft I could feel from the bed, dead leaves and damp gravel. That smell late autumn has when everything is just starting to rot down. I almost fell asleep again. The knock came at 3:09. 3 slow knocks on the back door, not frantic, not loud, measured, like someone who had all the time in the world. I sat up, I waited, it didn't come again. I opened the Nest app and switched to live feed. The back porch light was on, the doormat, the table saw under the tarp, the aluminum threshold of the door itself. Nobody there. My stomach dropped. I stared at the feed for a full minute. Nothing moved. The light stayed on, which meant something was still in the sensor zone. Then slowly it clicked off. The silence after that was a different kind of silence. I'm not a person who spooks easily. I've worked job sites alone. I've been in the woods at night. I've had the ordinary experiences of a man who spends a lot of time in quiet places. This was not that. This was the silence of listening. The feeling that whatever was outside was waiting just as hard as I was. The hair on my forearms came up and stayed up. I thought I could hear the faint give and settle of the porch boards the way they sound when weight comes on them slowly. I picked up my phone to call Dana. It was 3:11 in the morning and I knew I'd scare her. She didn't answer. I texted her, "Call me when you wake up." I got up, checked the dead bolt on the front door. Locked. Checked the garage entry. Locked. The laundry room window, the one with the gap at the top. I pressed the frame down until I heard the latch click. I hadn't realized how often I left it loose until that moment. I sat on the couch with the lights off and watched both cameras. At 3:34, the motion light triggered again. This time I was already watching. The yard was still, gate still closed, but I dragged the view angle toward the left edge of the frame and there was a shadow along the outside of the fence, not moving, just standing, right at the property line where the sensor had a harder time picking up detail. A shape upright still. I watched it for 40 seconds. It didn't move. Then the light cut off. The yard went dark. When it triggered again 2 seconds later, that section of fence was empty. I called the non-emergency line. The woman who answered was polite but flat. She said she'd log it as a welfare check and have a unit come by when one was available. She asked if the person had attempted to enter. I said I didn't know. She said if they did, call 911. I thanked her and hung up. I sat there listening to the house. I don't know how much time passed. The furnace ran and stopped. The oak branches scraped the fence. I was holding the phone tight enough that my hand ached. Back door camera, back door, garage, switching every 15 seconds. The cold had settled in fully. I hadn't moved to the thermostat. I didn't want to cross in front of a window. I sat in the same corner of the couch with a blanket pulled up to my chest, not for comfort. Staying still just felt like the right thing to do. My mouth tasted like copper. Every shape in that living room had the flat, depthless quality things get at 3 in the morning when you've stopped trusting your own eyes. At 4:02, the light above the garage came on. I switched to the garage feed. The driveway was empty. My Tacoma sat where I'd left it. The street beyond, State Road 1001, was dark in both directions, no headlights anywhere the camera could reach. But along the side of the garage, in the narrow pass-through between the garage wall and the neighbor's fence, I saw a figure, moving slowly, like they were taking inventory. They stopped at the side door of the garage. I heard the handle, one hard pull, then a softer one, testing the lock. Then nothing. I was on my feet. That side door had a hardware store knob lock, maybe 6 years old. One good shoulder and it would go. I went to the bedroom closet and got my shotgun, a Mossberg 500. I'd had it for years and I'd never pointed it at anything that wasn't a clay target. I loaded it. I stood in the hallway between the bedroom and the living room and listened. Quiet 30 seconds, a minute. Then I heard the back gate. The gate I'd watched stay closed all night. That specific sound, I'd oiled those hinges last summer. I knew that sound cold. I knew it the instant I heard it, the way you know the sound of your own name. Someone was in the backyard. I called 911, gave the address twice, said there was an intruder in my yard and possibly attempting entry. The dispatcher stayed on the line. I moved to the bathroom, interior wall, no windows, locked door, sat with the shotgun across my knees and the phone pressed to my ear. She was asking me questions, calm voice, I answered. Then I heard the back door handle. Not a knock this time, the handle turned. It held, the dead bolt caught, but it turned fully and held, and I could hear the door flex in its frame as weight went against it. Solid door, steel core exterior. But I heard the frame creak once, then go quiet, then creak again. A slow rhythmic pressure, someone leaning into it and releasing, leaning and releasing, feeling for the give. The sound seemed much louder than it should have been. The bathroom tile was cold through my socks. I kept the light off. I did not move. That was the moment I knew, not guessing, not wondering. I knew. This person had been outside for almost 2 hours, testing, watching, waiting for a light to come on and tell them where I was. I told the dispatcher, someone is trying to open the back door right now. She told me to stay in the locked room. Units were 2 minutes out. The handle stopped, silence. I sat in that bathroom and watched the slice of light under the door. I heard a car door outside, then another, a radio crackle. The dispatcher said officers were on scene. I didn't move until I heard knocking on the front door and a voice saying Morganton PD. I called through the door, asked them to identify. They gave me a badge number and said my address out loud. I unlocked the bathroom. I walked down the hall with the Mossberg pointed at the floor. 2 officers came through the front. They swept the house first. Then they went into the backyard. The back gate was standing open. On the other side of the fence, in the gravel of the easement that runs behind the block, they found a pry bar, not mine, a Stanley Fat Max 36-inch, just sitting there in the gravel like it had been set down fast. The back door frame showed marks consistent with an attempted forced entry. That's the phrase they used, the door had held. They didn't find the person. In the morning I pulled the Nest footage and went through it frame by frame with one of the officers. The shadow at the fence at 3:34 was there on the recording, clearer than I'd expected, a person, standing completely still, watching the house for over a minute. On the garage camera at 4:02, you could see a figure in a dark jacket move along the garage wall, hood up, hands in pockets until they reached the side door. Then one hand came out and grabbed the handle. The department kept a copy of the footage. I don't know if anyone was ever identified. Nobody called me back with a name. The pry bar was cataloged, and that was the last I heard. I called Dana that morning. I kept my voice level. She drove back from Ohio 2 days early anyway. We moved out 4 months later, found a place on the other side of Burke County, better locks, a solid fence, no easement behind it. I still check the cameras before I go to bed, both of them every night. And I make sure the back gate is latched. The photographs were of me, and they weren't from that week. I need to back up. My name is Cal. That fall I was 31, working remote for a logistics company, and I had 4 days I didn't know what to do with. A coworker had found a rental through a listing app, a farmhouse in the Ozarks outside a town called Caulfield in southern Missouri. He said it was cheap. He said it was quiet. He said the pictures looked beautiful. He wasn't wrong about any of that. I drove down from St. Louis on a Wednesday. The last real stop I made was a Waffle House off Route 60 in Willow Springs. I ate a late breakfast, got coffee for the road. The woman behind the counter asked where I was headed. When I told her the general area, she smiled like I'd said something mildly unfortunate. I didn't think anything of it then. The county road out to the property wasn't on most maps. The listing had included printed directions, which I thought was quaint. 2 miles past the old grain elevator, left at the dead oak, follow the gravel until the fence line. County Road 181, the printed sheet said at the top, though I never saw a sign for it anywhere along the way. The house sat at the end of a long driveway, maybe a quarter-mile of loose gray gravel that popped under my tires. White clapboard wide porch, a barn about 60 yards behind it. The hills rolled out behind the barn in every direction, tree-covered and amber that time of year. It was genuinely pretty. The lockbox code worked. I brought in my bags, found the fridge stocked with a few basics, and spotted the handwritten card on the kitchen table. Most rentals have a card like that: house rules, Wi-Fi password, trash day. This one had those things, but near the bottom, under a line about the fireplace flue, it said, "Please stay on the main property after dark. Do not go past the red gate at the south end of the barn." No explanation, just that. I looked out the kitchen window at the barn. I could see the edge of a red gate at the far side of it, the hinges rusted out orange. Past it, the hill dropped away into heavy timber. Standing there with a can of soup warming on the stove, I noticed how quiet it was, not peaceful quiet, an absence. No wind that first evening, no birds, nothing moving in the field between the house and the barn. The stillness had a weight to it. I didn't think much about the note. Rural properties have liability concerns. Maybe there was an old well back there, or a drop-off, or a property line someone had gotten litigious about. I made dinner, read for a while, went to bed early. The next morning I drove into Caulfield for groceries. Small place, a gas station, a Dollar General, a hardware store with a hand-painted sign. The streets were quiet in a way that felt ordinary rather than ominous. I was loading bags into the back of my Jeep when a man came out of the hardware store and stopped on the sidewalk. He was looking at me, older, maybe 60, wearing coveralls and a seed company cap. His face had spent most of its life outdoors, deeply lined around the eyes. "You the one staying out at the Briar place?" he said. I said I was. He nodded slowly. "You by yourself?" I told him I was. He looked at me for another moment. His expression wasn't unfriendly exactly. It was measured, careful, like he was deciding something. Then he went to his truck without another word. An old GMC, rust along the wheel wells. He drove slow down the main road until he was out of sight. I told myself it was a small-town thing. People notice strangers. The second night around 10, I heard a vehicle on the driveway. I went to the front window, headlights idling at the foot of the driveway, just sitting there, engine running, beams cutting straight up the gravel toward the house. No one got out. I stood at the window with the lights off inside so I could see better. After about 10 minutes, the lights backed out onto the county road and drove away. I stood in the dark kitchen for a while after, listening to the silence settle back in. The house smelled of old wood and something faintly chemical, like the kind of cleaner people use to mask other smells. I hadn't noticed it before. I noticed it then. I checked the listing host's contact number. No answer. I left a message. He called back the next afternoon. I told him about the truck. He said it was probably a neighbor cutting through. His voice was easy, almost rehearsed in its ease. But before he hung up, he said, almost offhand, "I noticed you've been getting your bearings. Just remember the note about the south gate." I hadn't told him I'd gone near the gate. I hadn't gone near the gate. I stayed inside that afternoon. I kept going back to that sentence. There was no camera listed in the property's amenities. I checked the corners of the main rooms as casually as I could, straightening picture frames, pretending to look at the artwork. I didn't find anything obvious. But the feeling that settled over me was different from the night before. The night of the headlights had felt like a coincidence. This felt like something else, something patient. The house felt smaller than it had that morning. The windows felt larger. I slept badly. I woke before 5 and couldn't get back to sleep, so I put on coffee and sat at the kitchen table while it was still dark. The barn was a gray shape in the pre-dawn, the red gate invisible from that angle. I watched it. I'm not sure why. There was no reason to. I just couldn't stop. Then I saw the light. A flashlight beam moving on the far side of the barn. Slow, deliberate, going back and forth like someone searching or like someone who wanted to be seen. It went on for maybe 3 minutes, then cut out clean. Not faded, cut like a switch. The dark that followed felt thicker than the dark before it. When the sun came up, I walked out there. The dew was heavy. My shoes were soaked through by the time I crossed the field. The padlock on the barn door had been left open, not broken. Open, like someone had forgotten to close it or hadn't bothered. I went inside. The barn was cold, several degrees colder than outside. Old equipment, hay bales gone gray and soft, a tarp over something bulky in the corner. A smell of must and old wood and something underneath that I couldn't name. Faintly sweet, faintly wrong. Light came through gaps in the siding in thin, dusty blades. I looked around for maybe 2 minutes and was about to leave when I saw the shelf on the far wall. 3 coffee cans, the old aluminum kind, the tall ones, set in a row with a neatness that didn't match the rest of the barn. I don't know why I reached for the nearest one. I think part of me already knew something was wrong and was still trying to talk myself out of it. The can was heavier than I expected. It was full of photographs. Printed on regular paper, the way you'd print something at home on an inkjet. The resolution was decent, better than decent. The subject was me. Me at the Waffle House in Willow Springs, sitting in the booth by the window. Me outside the Dollar General in Caulfield, squinting in the flat morning light. Me walking to my Jeep with bags, my back half turned. Me standing on the porch of the farmhouse that first evening, looking at the hills, one hand resting on the porch rail. That last one was taken from a distance. From the tree line, I think, from somewhere past the red gate, you could see my face clearly. Whoever took it had a decent lens, and they had been patient enough to wait. I went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature of the barn. My hands were shaking when I set the first photograph back down. The paper made a small sound against the aluminum rim of the can, and in that quiet barn it sounded very loud. There were 3 cans. I didn't open the other 2. I put the lid back on the first one, set it where I'd found it, and stood there for a moment looking at the row of cans. Then I walked back to the house, straight past the kitchen, straight to the bedroom. I pulled my bag off the floor and started putting things in it. I didn't fold anything. I didn't look out the windows. I just packed. I did one circuit of the house to make sure I had what mattered. Laptop, phone, charger, wallet. I left everything else. The coffee I'd made was still on the counter, still warm, still steaming faintly. I didn't touch it. I drove out the driveway at 5:47 in the morning. The county road was empty, the gravel still dark with dew, mist sitting low in the fields on both sides. I turned north. I did not stop at anything until I hit Route 60. I was an hour outside Springfield before my hands settled on the wheel. When I got home, I wrote a review, factual. I said what I'd found. I said why I left early. No threats, just what was in the barn. The review was taken down within 48 hours. I went back to the listing. It was still active. New photos, same location. I sent a report to the platform. They sent back a form email. About 3 months later, I was talking to my coworker, the one who'd recommended the place. I told him the short version. He got quiet. Then he told me he'd mentioned the area to another friend who had a place near Caulfield. That friend had said something similar, not the photos, but the truck at the foot of the driveway, the feeling of being watched from the trees. His friend had stayed all 5 nights. His friend had moved to a different city 6 months later and didn't talk about the trip. I never heard back from the host. The listing disappeared around November. Maybe someone else filed a report that landed differently than mine. Maybe something else happened. I don't know. I don't go that far south in Missouri anymore. There are other roads, other routes. I just take them. The second morning, I found boot prints on the porch that weren't mine. Let me back up, because looking back, I made every mistake a person can make. I booked the place the same night I found it. I didn't read the reviews carefully enough, and I drove down to the Ozarks alone in October because I needed 2 weeks away from everything and I didn't think it through. My name is Daniel. I was 31. I just ended a 5-year relationship, quit a job I hated, and decided that solitude would fix whatever was broken in me. I found a cabin on a rental site, $40 a night, a wood stove, a creak you could hear from the porch. The host was a woman named Betty, smiling in her profile photo, flower box behind her. I drove down from St. Louis on a Saturday, took I-44 south, then Route 60, then smaller roads after that. The last 20 miles were on gravel, unmarked on my GPS except as a thin gray thread. My Civic wasn't built for it. Dust came up through the floor vents. It was maybe 45 degrees, low ceiling of clouds, the kind of afternoon that feels later than it is. The ditches on both sides were full of dead goldenrod and collapsed sumac, rust-colored, still. I passed through a town called Calvert Creek, one stoplight, a Dollar General, a diner with a hand-painted sign that said Del as I stopped for coffee. The woman behind the counter barely spoke. 2 men at a table near the window watched me the whole time I ate, not aggressive, just steady. The way you watch something you're not sure about. I drank the coffee anyway and got back in the car. I found the cabin about 6 miles past town. It was nicer than I expected, small but clean. The creek was right where the listing said it would be. Betty had left a note on the table and a cord of wood stacked by the door. The note had house rules, normal stuff at first. Don't leave food out because of bears. Rinse your boots at the outdoor spigot. Close the flue when you're not using the stove. Then at the bottom, in smaller handwriting, almost like it had been added later, "Please don't go past the second gate after dark. This is for your safety." I read it twice. I went outside and looked down the gravel path leading away from the cabin. I could see one gate, a simple cattle gate, rusted off to the left, no second gate. The tree line started maybe 80 yards out. I texted Betty to ask about it. She replied 40 minutes later, just, "The neighbors don't like visitors on that part of the land after sundown. Best to respect it." I set my phone down and started unpacking. The first night was fine. I slept well. The creek sound helped. The second morning was when I found the prints. They came up the left side of the porch steps, crossed in front of the door, and stopped at the window beside it. The mud was dry. Whoever it was had been there before dawn. The tread was deep and wide, maybe a size 12, thick lug sole, the kind of boot you wear working land or hauling wood. My feet are a 10. I stood there in the cold for a long minute just looking at them. There was no mud anywhere else on the porch, no smear, no scatter. Just a clean, deliberate line of prints that walked up, stopped, and did not walk away. I couldn't find where the return steps went. The gravel at the bottom of the stairs doesn't hold impressions, and the grass to the right was stiff with frost. I told myself it was a neighbor, someone checking on the place. Maybe Betty had a handyman. I went inside, made coffee, and let it go. That afternoon, I drove back into Calvert Creek for groceries. The Dollar General was the only option. Canned soup, bread, crackers. When I got to the register, the teenage girl working it looked at my debit card as she handed it back. "You're staying at the Holly's land," she said. It wasn't a question. "The cabin on Route F," I said, "off the gravel road." "Yeah," she said, "that's the Holly's land." She didn't say anything after that. I picked up my bag and left. I didn't know what the Holly's land meant. I still don't fully. That night around 9, I heard a truck idle at the bottom of the driveway. I turned off the lamp and looked out the front window. An old F-250, dark-colored, sat at the edge of the gravel with its headlights off, just idling. The exhaust rose in a pale ribbon in the cold air. I couldn't see the driver. The engine had a ticking knock to it, something worn in the valves, a sound that carried clearly in the quiet. I stood there watching it for probably 4 minutes. Then it pulled away. I locked both doors, checked every window, added wood to the stove, and sat up until midnight before I finally went to bed. The third day was quiet. I hiked along the creek. I read. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. Cities make you paranoid. An old truck at the end of a gravel road doesn't mean anything. That's what I kept telling myself. Then around dusk, a man appeared at the far edge of the yard. He was standing at the cattle gate, just standing there, hands at his sides. Canvas work pants, dark jacket. He wasn't doing anything. He wasn't walking toward me. He was just there, looking at the cabin. I watched him from the porch for a long time. He didn't move. I raised my hand the way you do with neighbors. He didn't respond, didn't wave back, didn't nod, just kept looking. I went inside. He was still there when I checked 20 minutes later. Then it was dark and I couldn't see the gate anymore. That night I woke up at 2 in the morning. I don't know what woke me. Some sound my brain caught before I was fully conscious. I lay still in the dark and listened. The cabin had cooled while I slept. The fire burned down to coals. The cold had settled into the floorboards and the walls. I could smell wood smoke and something underneath it, something faint and animal, wet canvas, turned earth. I got up and moved to the front room. The porch light was on. I hadn't turned the porch light on. I stood in the middle of the room and listened. The creak, wind pressing against the walls in low, irregular bursts, and then, very quietly, the creak of a board on the porch. One step, then another. I went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature, the kind of cold that starts behind the sternum and moves outward. Every sound sharpened. I could hear my own pulse. I looked around the room. There was a splitting maul near the wood stove. I picked it up. My hands were shaking. I held it anyway. The step stopped. I didn't move. I didn't breathe right. I stood there in the dark with that maul in both hands and waited. The silence stretched out in a way that felt occupied, like the quiet had waited. 15 seconds, 30. The stove ticked as the metal cooled. The creek ran on, indifferent. Then I heard it. Right outside the door, someone on the other side of the wood, not knocking, just standing there. I could feel it the way you feel a presence in a dark room before you see anything, some change in the air, some pressure that didn't belong. Then a voice, quiet, almost gentle. "You ought to go home, son." I didn't answer. I couldn't. A minute passed, maybe 2. Then the porch boards creaked again, moving away this time, down the steps, across the gravel, soft and steady until there was nothing. No engine starting, no gate latch, just the creak in the wind and me standing in the dark holding a splitting maul. I didn't sleep. I sat in the chair facing the door with the maul across my knees until gray light started coming through the windows. Then I packed my bag. It took 15 minutes. I left everything I couldn't fit in the car, didn't clean up, didn't strip the bed. I drove down the gravel road in first light, past the cattle gate without looking at the tree line. I hit Route F and pointed the car north, went through Calvert Creek without stopping, didn't look at Della's, didn't look at the Dollar General. I got to I-44 and drove. I didn't stop until I hit a Flying J outside Rolla. I sat in that parking lot for a while with the engine running. My hands were still shaking a little. I went inside, got coffee, sat in a booth under fluorescent lights and just breathed. I left Betty a message saying I'd had a family emergency and had to leave early. She asked if everything was okay. I said yes. I didn't leave a review. I wasn't sure what I would even write. About 3 months later, I was reading a local news aggregator, the kind that pulls stories from county papers across the state. I don't know why I was looking at Ozarks coverage. Some part of me was still trying to understand. There was a short piece from the Douglas County paper. A man had been arrested on a property off Route F outside Calvert Creek. The article didn't give many details. It mentioned trespassing, a dispute over land access, and a history of boundary issues with neighboring residents. There was one name in the article, not Betty, someone named Gary Hollies. I stared at that name for a long time. I never called the county. I never tried to find out more. I don't know if what was happening out there had anything to do with me specifically, or if I just stumbled into the edge of something that had been going on long before I showed up. But I think about that voice sometimes, how calm it was, how it wasn't a threat exactly, more like something final had already been decided and telling me was just a courtesy. You ought to go home, son.